Previously on the Transplant Kitchen.
I want to go off on a poke tangent right now, but I'm biting my lip. We'll do a poke episode sometime and teach people how to make real poke.
No. Let it go.
Salut les amis, and welcome to the Transplant Kitchen on Paris Underground Radio. I'm your host, Omid Tavallai.
And I am Alannah Tavallai.
And together we are Emperor Norton, purveyors of food from California, the American West, and the Pacific Rim, but doing it in Paris, France. As you heard in the flashback to a previous episode in the intro, today we're focusing on the Pacific Rim part of what we do because I want to talk about poke. Poke is a topic I can really go off on when it comes to food that's popular in Paris.
Omid, is there a topic that you don't go off on?
Well, poke is topical because it's really having a moment right now in France. It kind of has been for a while. In our neighborhood, which is in central Paris, you can't swing a baguette without hitting a poke joint.
Poke bowl joint.
Right, the now ubiquitous poke bowl. So you'd think with all these poke bowl places that we're awash in what Hawaiians would call ono grinds. But alongside all these raw fish-topped LT lunches, there's nary a plate lunch to be found. No Kahlua pork, no Fat Mac salad, no Mochiko chicken.
No Loco Moco.
No, but there's a very good non-Hawaiian place called Moco Loco, an offshoot of Mocha Nuts, whom we've plugged previously for their cookies.
Yes, but they don't serve Loco Moco either.
Well, no one's perfect. For those of you who don't know Loco Moco, it's a delightfully filling meal. It's essentially rice topped with a hamburger patty, fried egg, and gravy. You'd think that would go over well here because if you just took a steak cheval, that's steak haché topped with a fried egg, and poured some sauce au poivre over it, which is essentially a peppery gravy, you just need rice, which seemingly every French restaurant does have.
But do they have the correct rice?
Of course they don't. It would probably be like riz de Camargue or some shitty low-grade basmati that no person with a molecule of melanin in their skin would serve to anyone. Anyway, that's Loco Moco, but I'm here to whine about poke. What's poke, Alannah?
Poke likely came to be as a way to use up small parts of fish. Centuries before European travelers, colonizers, arrived, Polynesians were seasoning raw reef fish with salt and seaweed and combining it with crushed and roasted kukui, also called candle nuts. Salting and seasoning not only made it taste better, but also acted as a preservative.
So, old school preservation.
So, while there are similar dishes to poke throughout Polynesia, such as ikamata in the Cook Islands, kokoda in Fiji, oka in Samoa, and ota'ika in Tonga, however, poke is distinct in that it's not prepared with citrus nor coconut. Over time, fishing techniques improved, and unfortunately, nearshore reef fish declined due to the increase in tourism.
It happens.
So instead of reef fish, fish like ahi, which is yellowfin tuna, ono, and billfish replaced reef fish as the fish in modern poke. And on top of that, immigrants to Hawaii, often Chinese and Japanese descent in the beginning, brought their own ingredients, which were then incorporated into the local cuisine, particularly soy and sesame oil. Nowadays, you'll find not only ahi limu, which is tuna and seaweed, which is the traditional modern version of poke, but you'll also find kimchi shrimp, hirikake salmon, smoked or boiled taco, which is octopus. In some places, pipikaula, which is dried beef, or bacalhau poke, which is Portuguese dried salt cod.
Oh, yeah, lots of bacalhau here. Maybe not in poke.
Even for those who don't eat meat, fish, which is meat.
Not according to France.
Who don't remember. Even sometimes a tofu version.
I'm down with that.
Poke became known beyond Hawaii and visitors to Hawaii, probably in the early 90s. Many credit this to Chef Sam Choi, who promoted Hawaiian regional cuisine. It was a movement in the early 90s. He had a poke contest featuring poke recipes from across the state, encouraging chefs and home cooks to be inventive.
I've been to Sam Choi's. It's pretty damn good.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Well, in Seattle, not in Hawaii.
Oh, I was going to say, you haven't been to Hawaii. So, the big question is, if poke is so diverse, what actually defines what is and is not poke? The word poke roughly means chunks or mini pieces. So you could say chunks of protein, generally fish, seafood, which is marinated in a mixture of salt and seasonings before serving. And that's actually a key element. You don't add the salt and seasoning right before serving. You don't add it after serving. It is definitely something that has to be mixed all together before serving.
So it has to marinate.
Yes. Citrus is not used as it would cook the raw fish.
And turn it into ceviche.
It's a savory dish that's mostly protein, so the addition of things like kale, purple cabbage, corn, bamboo shoots generally makes it not poke.
Which is what we see here. And do any of the poke bowl places here serve, like, actual poke?
I haven't come across one, but I stopped looking, so I can't say for sure.
I don't blame you. There's one I can recall that tasted like actual, maybe they went to Hawaii once, poke, but it was served over jasmine rice.
Yeah, not the correct rice.
Yeah, but it's cheap, and we know damn well that restaurants run on razor-thin margins. Which, of course, still doesn't excuse the inexcusable. Although here's the deal. While poke bowls are a thing here and in the US, Hawaiians are probably shaking their heads at the concept of us plating Instagram-perfect bowls of poke with edamame, red cabbage, pomegranate seeds, and sometimes, wait for it, even the rice.
Right, because Hawaiians tend to eat poke on its own, in huge scoops from a bulk bin at the supermarket counter.
Right. If you're on the gram, check out the accompanying photo to this podcast from our friend Arnold, who shared a snap of a Hawaiian poke counter with the caption, "Hey mainlanders, this is what real poke looks like." So besides being served over shitty rice and being garnished with irrelevant toppings, what's so wrong with the poke here? I'd say the marinade's all wrong. I mean, sometimes it's just like teriyaki sauce or sweet soy sauce, which people put on their fucking sushi here. It's kind of disgusting. My Japanese side just like completely cringes, and all my ancestors want to like disown me for being in a place where they eat sushi with sweet soy. Oftentimes, I actually do see like ceviche in a poke bowl, like ceviche de dorade, a sea bream ceviche in poke. Sometimes no marinade. It's actually just like a chirashi bowl, and some sushi places are actually rebranding their chirashi into poke bowls because people love poke bowls all of a sudden now. And then there's one place where I saw, alright, steel yourself for this. There's one place where I saw actual cooked tuna on top of some rice with some veggies, and they called that a poke bowl.
Cooked tuna, like...
Yeah, canned tuna, like...
Like canned tuna?
Yeah, like Charlie tuna, like Star-Kissed, whatever.
No.
And they called that a poke bowl. No. And it wasn't even like... There wasn't even like soy sauce or sesame oil. It was just literally canned tuna over rice in one of those like cardboard bowl things with like a sprinkling of other vegetables. It may as well have been a salad niçoise over rice. And then there is such a thing here. I don't know if... You know, because it is a marinated protein, there is such a thing as a chicken poke bowl here. Now, I've never bothered to get it. My dear, sweet, lovable, awesome bar manager, Flo, ordered some one night, and he doesn't eat fish, but they accidentally delivered him the salmon poke anyway, which I told him, you know, serves him right for ordering chicken poke. I have once seen poke done right here, and that was Andy's octopus poke. He was the old chef and owner of the original Rice and Fish in the second arrondissement. And that octopus poke was pretty badass. It was spot on. That's the last good poke I'd seen around here. There are also a host of non-gustatory issues I have with poke, but I'm sure many of you are already hungry and just want the damn recipe. So let's go over how to make a proper poke when you're, like us, nowhere near Hawaii. First, you're going to need fish, not chicken, not canned tuna.
Not canned tuna, please.
Raw sashimi grade fish. Well, do you really need sashimi grade? What does that even mean?
So, many people are going to be very unhappy to hear this, but sushi grade and sashimi grade are just marketing terms. They have no real significance. Sushi and sashimi were appropriated for this purpose because many Americans were eating sushi and were already familiar and comfortable with that concept. But the grade portion of that label is entirely misleading.
In what way?
Well, there's no national governing body that grades fish in the same way that the USDA grades beef.
Okay, so there's no, like, USDA prime raw fish.
No. So while the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration of the U.S., issues advisory guidelines for processes for handling a variety of fish meant for raw consumption, those guidelines are not intended to determine the quality of the fish, only its relative safety for eating raw.
That sounds reassuring.
Yeah, so when you see a piece of fish labeled sushi or sashimi grade, that means only that the seller themselves has judged it safe to eat raw. So the claim is only as trustworthy as the fish market that makes it.
That would explain that one time when we were in Copenhagen and I went to that fish market that had all that awesome freshly delivered fish and I wanted like a little bit of each different kind and the guy asked me like what the hell I was doing. I said, I'm going to make sushi out of it. And his eyes just kind of bugged out and said like, okay, you can do that with this salmon and this other piece of fish, but none of the others. I'm like, what? It's like, well, these are all freshly caught. They just came in and they haven't been deep frozen or flash frozen. That's the first time I learned that fish for raw consumption should be frozen. Apparently, fish needs to be flash frozen to kill parasites in order to be consumed safely. Here in France, we have a couple of different terms for freezing. There's surgelé, that's a deep freeze, and that's frozen between -30 and -50 degrees Celsius. And congelé is just normal frozen. That would be done above -12 degrees Celsius. And that's not considered flash frozen because it takes too long to get the core down to a frozen state. But the first one, surgelé, in France is what's considered safe to consume raw. So where are we going to get this fish? Obviously, if you have a good Asian market with a sushi counter, like Kmart, that has a few locations around Paris, you can get the proper fish there. If you are in Paris, there's also Poissonnerie Ebisu, that has 2 locations now. Interesting note about Poissonnerie Ebisu, it's got a French name, Poissonnerie, and Ebisu, Japanese. I believe the guy that runs it, he was a chef who trained under some various Japanese sushi masters, but I believe he's Latino.
Oh.
And lives and works here in France. And he learned the art of ikejime, which is a very specific way of treating and ending the life of the fish before butchery. And so he actually gets live caught fish locally from like Brittany and around the coast of France, brings them in and performs ikejime on them. So it's a very high quality fish. You've had the sushi there.
It's super
great.
Good.
Yeah. So you can actually get ikejime fish right here in Paris. But to continue our love fest for big industrial chains, my go-to for fish, for making our own sushi or poke is Picard, the frozen food chain. Well, and here's why. It's definitely surgelé. In fact, it's part of their name, Picard les surgelés. All their stuff is flash frozen, deep frozen. I would not buy sushi there. No. But I'll buy the fish for the sushi there. It's affordable. You pay like, €6-7 for a fillet? That's not bad, you know? Economies of scale at work here. And yeah, it's already filleted. So if you're not into breaking down whole fish or butchering fish or even peeling the skin off of fish, you're all set. You just need to defrost it in the fridge till it's soft enough to cut and you're good to go. The Transplant Kitchen will be back after a word from our sponsors.
And now, back to the Transplant Kitchen.
So, speaking of which, now that you know where to get your protein, at least here in France, let's do the recipe for poke. This serves 2 as a meal, 4 as an appetizer, or 1 for me, the amount I eat. You're going to want 250 grams of like a tuna fillet or skinless salmon if you must. 1/4 of a sweet onion. Here we do the oignon doux de Cévennes. Obviously, if you are in the United States, particularly on the West Coast, you have access to Hawaiian sweet onions or Walla Walla sweet onions from Alannah's home region in Eastern Washington. 2 teaspoons of soy sauce, because this is basically a shoyu, which is the Japanese and thus Hawaiian word for soy sauce. Poke. A teaspoon of toasted sesame oil. Optionally, you can add a drop of honey and a drop of sriracha, optionally. You'll want a small knob of freshly grated ginger. If you've got a microplane, that's the way to go. But otherwise, one of those like little Japanese ginger graters, little ceramic ones, also very good. I like to use salicorn, as it's called here in French, otherwise known as sea beans, as a little addition to the poke, or some dried wakame. You can use fresh wakame, but I find that too wet, and I'll get to that in a moment. And another option that I almost never use, and I think this became a substitute for the kukui nut, is a little bit of chopped macadamia. I'm just not a big fan of nuts in general, and macadamia is also really freaking expensive here. Oddly enough, the one place I have seen to buy it on the regular is the Indian market. So you want to cut the fish into 1 to 2 centimeter cubes. That's a little under an inch if you're not metric. If you're starting with frozen fish, defrost it about halfway, like in the fridge, not out on the counter. It'll be much easier to handle, especially if you don't have sushi level knife sharpening skills. You can have like a shitty IKEA knife, and if it's like a half-frozen block of fish, you'll cut through it pretty easily and make clean cuts. If you're starting with it fresh, put it in the freezer for like 20 or 30 minutes to firm it up, and thus make it easier to cut. And you're going to take that diced fish and put it in a mixing bowl. Now finely slice the sweet onion and add it to the fish. And then separately, mix the soy sauce, the sesame oil, honey, ginger, sriracha if you want. Mix that up and gently pour it over the fish bit by bit and gently toss it until it's just coated with the sauce. Don't drown your fish. This is a light marinade. It's not a heavy, heavy sauce. Ideally, you'll let this rest for about 20 to 30 minutes in the fridge to let the flavors come together and for it to marinate just enough. That's the optimum time to eat it, in my opinion. Though you can eat it right away or let it hold till later. Like when you see those counters of bulk poke in Hawaii, that's obviously more than 20 to 30 minutes old, but it's still good. Personally, I don't go more than a day later, although the fish is safe to eat for a couple of days. It just starts to break down to become less tasty over time. Have you had poke that's more than a day old?
No, because I don't eat it. I'm really...
You're more sensitive. Sometimes what I do, at that point, I will actually like saute it or something and make a cooked dish out of it.
So for me, it's really a texture thing. The fish just gets mushy.
Yeah. It loses the texture.
Gross.
It's safe. It's totally safe.
It's gross.
It does, yeah. It, like I said, it starts to break down and become less tasty.
Sorry, as I keep telling my daughter not to say things are gross, she doesn't prefer because it's rude.
Do as I say, not as I do. Anyway, when you do bring it out to serve, that's when I would hit it with a garnish of sea beans or wakame. Now, if you're using the dry wakame, which I recommend, give it a few minutes to hydrate in the poke after you add it. The texture is really nice. It just starts to soften up a little bit. In fact, some Hawaiian friends have told me that my use of dried wakame and salicorn actually makes for a close approximation for the flavors of limu, which is the kind of seaweed used in proper original OG poke, but there's no way we're going to get limu here. Then, of course, you can garnish with a little bit of macadamia nut, and naturally you can serve it with rice. We like white or brown Japanese rice. Sometimes I get fancy and garnish it with salmon or trout roe. Probably not very OG, but it is a protein. It's salty. I just like salmon roe. Other times, I just want the poke with some tortilla chips. Alannah has a trick for serving it at parties.
Oh, yes. I like to serve poke and
many other things.
Many other things in wonton cups.
Can you quickly tell us how you do the wonton cups?
So wonton cups are, for me, they're really easy. I was actually describing them to a friend earlier today, though, and she told me that my definition of easy and many other people's definition of easy might be a bit different.
All right, spill it.
So you buy the package of wonton wrappers from the fridge
section
little
in your
square
Asian
things,
store.
And I take them and place them like on a cutting board or baking sheet and just brush them with vegetable oil. And then gently press them in mini or regular muffin cups, depending on the size.
Like a muffin tin or little papers? Or?
Muffin tin. Sorry, muffin tin. And then you bake those for about, I think it's about like 8 minutes at 180 degrees Celsius.
Okay, or 350 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, just bake them until they're crispy, like a chip.
Yeah, they're like golden brown. But they're a cup instead of a chip.
But then it's a cup.
And then you fill them with poke.
And then you fill them with all sorts of delicious things, and you put them out, and everyone thinks you're fancy.
We've used them for events, for very fancy events, and they are magical vessels. And you gotta say, Alannah, you are pretty fly for a white girl.
Oh, God.
Which brings me to what I really, actually, seriously want to bitch about on the topic of poke in Paris, and that is cultural appropriation. As a person of no color, can I put you on the spot and ask you if you feel you've participated in cultural appropriation?
Oh, no, 100%. 100% I have participated in cultural appropriation. And I was too dumb to even know it.
Yeah.
And I actually got called out on it and was offended that I was being called out because I didn't understand. I was serving tamales. And a girl from Texas came in of Mexican descent. And she was very intrigued by a white girl from America serving tamales to French people. And so we got into a discussion about my knowledge of Mexican food, which does come from, we had an exchange student from Leon, Mexico, live with my family when I was in junior high, and he cried for like the first month he lived with us, and then his mom sent this giant box full of sauces and masa and all sorts of things, and these sheets with recipes on them, but he didn't know how to cook.
And you did.
And I did, but I didn't know how to read Spanish. So he stood at my elbow and translated the recipes, and then I would do what it said to do, with him standing there letting me know if it was right or not. So I did learn to cook. So it was Maria Henya Velasquez is the woman who taught me through her son. My initial foray into it. But, it's not my food. And that girl was pissed. And,
Really?
Understandably, yeah, she was super pissed at me. She was also pissed because I was trash talking one of the few Mexican, quote, quote, Mexican places that was open when we were here. And some of the things I was trying to explain to her about why it was bad, she was like, but that exists. And I'm like, you have Tex-Mex. Like, I'm not talking about the same thing. She just couldn't understand what I was trying to say. And I really do hope she went there because she would agree with me, I'm pretty sure, at least on that one tiny point, that place was terrible.
That it just wasn't good.
That place was terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so I mean, I'm sure there are many other examples of me trying to share food that I was excited about without thinking about what it meant for me to be serving it.
Well, if you could get over your white guilt for a moment and put your professor hat on and define cultural appropriation for us.
So, to define cultural appropriation, I look to a historian who has spent years bringing this issue to light, Michael Twitty.
I love him.
I love him. I love him because he, I think, is the first time I really started listening to him talk at MAD one year. That's
the chef's conference in Copenhagen, started by the Noma people and René Redzepi.
I feel like it was probably the first time, that I began to reflect upon some of my choices and the things that I had done unintentionally even. First off, which I think is very important, he makes the distinction between cultural appropriation and cultural diffusion.
Which is?
So, cultural diffusion is, as he says, a natural process when people of multiple different cultures live close together in some environment and can't help but rub off on one another.
Which is basically where all my culinary influence comes from living in California and growing up among every kind of Asian, every kind of Latino, and all just sharing each other's food and culture and shit talking.
Yes. So cultural appropriation, conversely, is, as he says, about exploitation, abuse, and theft.
That's pretty heavy.
So he says, you know it when you see it. It's like obscenity. I would say, not to disagree with him, but I would say as a white person that we often don't know it when we see it.
Yeah, I would say you said you know it when you see it. Yeah, as a brown person, as half Asian, I know it when I see it. I just saw it earlier today. Somebody I know went to a ramen place. I'm like, oh, what's that? And I was curious and clicked on the location on Instagram and scrolled through it, and I see no Asian faces, and I see white dudes wearing like kimono tops while holding up bowls of ramen and other like fusion food or whatever. And I'm fine with the food and all that, but I'm looking at these pictures and just kind of cringing. And I'm pretty sure neither they nor the majority of their Parisian audience that looks at their Instagram is seeing what I am seeing.
Yeah. So I was having to think about how to kind of explain cultural appropriation to people who maybe just are a bit blind to it because it doesn't affect them. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking an example could be, say your grandmother has this great recipe, right? And she's passed it on to you, and you make it and you take it to gatherings, a potluck, or even bigger events, and people are like, it's amazing, they love it. And there's some guy there, a lot of money, and he comes up and he says, hey, this is great, can I get the recipe? And you say, sure, and you give him the recipe, right? And then the next thing you know, he's making it, but some of the ingredients were kind of hard to find or too expensive, so he's changed it up quite a bit, and it's really not your grandmother's recipe, but he's calling it your grandmother's recipe. Like he's saying it's, Nana's recipe. And maybe he even goes on to start selling this to other people. He opens a restaurant and it's called Nana's Restaurant. And he's selling Nana's dish, but it's
your Nana's dish.
Your Nana's dish, but it's not your Nana's dish because he's changed it so much to be more convenient for him or more match his taste preferences.
But he's still trading off yo mama. Or your mama's mama.
And maybe he's even using some caricature of a picture of your grandma, right? Mm-hmm. And then to fucking top it off, you then make your Nana's recipe, and you bring it to an event, and someone says, but this isn't Nana's recipe.
Because they all had the other one.
They all had the other one.
And think that's what Nana's recipe is.
So now Nana's recipe doesn't even really belong to you.
Yeah. That's sad.
And that's just a tiny piece of what cultural appropriation does.
Well, myself as a person of color, am I capable of culture appropriating? Yeah, sure as hell am. I'm a non-Mexican and I make and serve tacos all night to a largely white clientele. I can try to justify it by saying I'm quite visibly brown and I grew up eating this stuff, and it's kind of the cultural diffusion thing. Or that the owner of Red House, where I work in the evenings, is from New Mexico. Does that really justify anything? Or that what we're doing is what we call Texicali cuisine. Not Mexican by any stretch, and we don't say it's Mexican. But really, I feel okay with it because I don't feel like I am stealing opportunity from anyone. And that's the part of cultural appropriation that really gets to me. There are a good number of Mexican joints in Paris now, unlike when you were doing the tamales and the one real Mexican place was really not up to snuff. And they are run by actual Mexicans and other Latinos. They all do way more business than we'll ever do. I am no threat at all. And some of them even come to eat my food as I do theirs. We hang out, we eat each other's food. And I'm no longer smuggling couch surfing ingredients because there are Mexican stores with Mexican owners from whom I now get the specialty items that I use. So I feel okay making tacos. Plus, I'm not saying they're authentic. The Transplant Kitchen will be back after a word from our sponsors.
And now, back to the Transplant Kitchen.
Speaking of ownership, are there any Hawaiian-owned restaurants in Paris or elsewhere in Europe? This is where we ask the producer to insert the sound of crickets. kidding aside, I don't know. I need to do more research, but so far, I'm turning up nothing. Like, most of the poke bowl joints are simply entrepreneurs jumping on a trend to turn a quick buck or euro. To their credit, many of them are Asian, churning out quote-unquote poke bowls and bubble tea to any round eye who's got a ticket resto to spend on their lunch break. Some of them even throw bagels in the mix, which I can't figure out why, other than the fact that the ticket resto crowd like those too, or at least they did. The bagel trend seems to be dying. I can't complain too much about those guys, other than the fact that their food isn't really worthwhile. I mean, look, you're Asian, you go to the bank for a loan for a restaurant, they're going, what are you doing? Sushi? Bobun? Poke? Okay, here's a loan. My problem really is, sorry, I don't mean to sound like a dick, my problem is with the white guys and girls, let's be inclusive, there are girls who do this too, in this poke spacing, with MBAs. They have all the connections. They already have resources. They're connected to PR, friends in media that they went to school with and all that. And they all somehow have the same story of, oh, I went to Hawaii once and fell in love with the food and wanted to bring that aloha vibe to Paris. Yeah. Well, apparently they have a very limited scope of what the food and aloha vibe from Hawaii is if it's just a poke bowl. Where's the Moco Loco? Where's the Loco Moco? And they all have like slick Instagram accounts, run highly manicured PR ops, and yet not one morsel of anything resembling Hawaiian food has gone through their doors.
I actually recall one of these chains, the owner of one of these chains, literally making fun of a mom and pop poke joint around the corner from them for going out of business.
I kind of want to name and shame, but the laws here are kind of difficult with that stuff. But yeah, I know which utter assholes you're talking about. And that's why none of you listening should ever go get poke from a chain here. So there's one place from a guy with an empire of lost luggage services around the world. And apparently the woman running the kitchen is part Hawaiian. They do a halal spam musubi based on turkey, which you think would be right up my alley considering my background, but I don't know. I'm not going to judge them. So is it appropriation then if there doesn't seem to be much of a Hawaiian or Pacific Islander population to be stealing opportunity from here? I would say yes, because they're still profiting from someone else's culture and they haven't contributed anything back to it. I don't know how one would do that, but there doesn't seem to be, it seems to be a one-way thing, not a two-way exchange, right. Which gets my goat. And France did and continues to colonize the South Pacific and continues to benefit from it, as we saw from the recent, let's say, not 100% legit vote for the independence of New Caledonia. Mm. So I'm curious, though, because usually there's, with colonization, a reverse trade also happens. So where are the French Polynesian places? Are they just not in Paris? Maybe somewhere else? We see Inano beer from Tahiti, Monoi, which is like a skin lotion from Tahiti, and of course, Tahitian vanilla in everything.
In everything.
Way too much vanilla. On the other hand, there was a Polynesian chef at my old, company cafeteria, and every once in a while they'd let him do his thing, and he did a shark with vanilla, which was actually really delicious. So, apparently, once in a while, Polynesians and Pacific Islanders do get the opportunity to show their stuff here. I'd like to see more of it. I'd just like to see a little more representation. It was very obvious that many of our Asian friends in San Francisco were from Hawaii. They were of Japanese, Filipino, Chinese descent, which they will clearly make a distinction of from being Hawaiian, which would mean indigenous Hawaiian most of the time. And so they educated me, and I'm sure you, as we ran in the same circles before we were together, on the culture and the amazing cuisine, and it just annoys me to see it being done so poorly while claiming to bring over the aloha vibe. Yeah. Not that, back home they're immune to it, that you have, first off, the poke bowl thing, which isn't authentic. I hate to use that word. And then also you have weird, crappy knockoffs of places like L&L Barbecue and other joints like that are just obviously cash grabs. So, it's not exclusive to here. But coming back to appropriation, it's just a topic not talked about much in France. I don't know if it's been given a French term yet. I'm sure it has. like l'appropriation culturelle, or maybe I should have Googled this before talking about it.
Probably.
But in all the stuff that I pay attention to with social justice and woke activism and all that, I really don't hear much about cultural appropriation here. Asians have been speaking up much more about a lot of imagery being co-opted, about like the white dudes in kimonos, like serving ramen, or stuff like that. That community has started to become a little more vocal about it. There has been more awareness from various communities and speaking up and banding together. For instance, Jennifer of Paris Underground Radio, on her weekly update of events, featured a Christmas market, a Marché de Noël, from Je Consomme Noir, I believe the organization is called, for helping to showcase black creators and sell merchandise and all that. And it sounded pretty cool. And of course, right after that marché happened, there was a little backlash against saying, oh, that's communautarism, that's reverse racism to have a market that has black creators. And their response was, no, there's nothing illegal about having a Christmas market of black creators because anybody is welcome to come. We're just trying to showcase and uplift a particular community. And then there was all this response that, oh, that's communautarisme, which is one of those isms that's apparently very evil here. It says that you don't want to integrate into society, that you don't want to participate in the greater French society and only want to be closed off in your own little community. I don't think that's the case with stuff like this. It's a matter of saying that our voices, what we do, matters.
I think a lot of times in France, I find that the whole notion of integration is used as a cover for saying that they want people to act like white French people. Yeah.
Well, Valérie Pécresse just said, like, you should have a Christmas tree to be French, shit like that.
And it's often used as a way of quieting people who point out injustices or at least inequalities that exist in French culture.
Putting down the uppity minorities. Yeah, they just attach an ism to it and make it evil. Wokeism. Like, what is that? Cooking with a wok? No, that's the word WOKISME. Wokeism, as this evil, like, wokeness, like people who are demanding social justice, who are for feminism, who are for LGBTQ rights. It's all being branded under wokeism by our supposed center government because they're kowtowing to the right to get the votes because they're worried about not winning in fucking 2022 instead of actually having some kind of goddamn principles of a republic, of equality. Anyway, I'm going off on all this political shit. I shouldn't. This is a food podcast, so we need to take solace in food. That's the way I see it. Fuck everything. I'm gonna eat. I'm gonna eat my feelings. I'm gonna eat my anger. But food, especially for us in the business of food, is commerce. We can't make food for a living if we can't sell it. And for years, people of color and immigrants have had their food toned down, like Indian food here, even when it's very good, very high-end Indian food that's very respected and made with great ingredients, still kind of bland. Not much heat. It's often conflated, so you'll have items like bo bun, which is a misnomer anyway, but bo is Vietnamese for beef. Bun, like the bun vermicelli noodles, made with chicken or fish, even though the word of the dish means beef. Or yakitori, which means grilled chicken. Again, being made with beef and cheese. Not Japanese at all. Or hummus. Hummus. The word literally is Arab for chickpeas. But then you have someone like Alain Passard making beetroot hummus. Carrot hummus, and then everybody else latches onto it. So every wannabe restaurant is doing like hummuses.
Oh, they've based been doing that in the U.S. a lot too. It's a very popular thing.
Well, yeah, it's this conflation thing. And then there's the pan-regionalization, as I'll call it, because you can't just have a Chinese restaurant. It has to be Chinese, Thai, Vietnamese, or Japanese, Chinese, Korean, or you have like pan-Latin places now that do Peruvian, Mexican, Argentinian. Okay, fine. You can do that, but at the same time, I'm just thinking you're probably not doing all those things well, because they're not. But they have to, because that's the only way these businesses seem to be able to survive is to cater to the taste of, the person who comes in that just wants Asian food. Because you're going to have a group that comes in and one of them wants sushi, one of them wants bulbun, one of them wants pho, and the other wants poke.
Yeah.
So as immigrants and as people of color in France, and this applies elsewhere in Europe as well, we don't have access to the same resources, the same networks, the lines of credit, etc. So we can't come in with €1 million restaurant build out in immediate press and make the statement, this is my food, this is my culture, and this is how we make the world more delicious. We don't have the luxury or the privilege to be ourselves and reflect who we are and make a life based on that. We are not generally in a position to be in charge of our own destiny. Whereas a white French guy, like say, I'm not saying this is what they do, but take a TV chef like Jean-François Piège, who does deals like Coca-Cola and shit like that. If he were to open a quote-unquote ethnic restaurant tomorrow, all the press would be all over it and people would be lined up and making reservations to go there, even though he probably doesn't know jack shit about the dish he's going to serve. Maybe he does. I don't know. I just pulled one out of the air. Pulled one dude out of the air. If somebody without the backing, without the press, without the following, wanted to do the same thing, they can't even get the loan, even a small loan, to open a small corner spot. They have to work 50 times harder to do something than somebody who's already got it all and doesn't really need to add to their empire.
Yeah.
I want to go back to Michael Twitty, because he called for what's called culinary justice. And that's the thing he said at MAD that I really loved. Culinary justice is, quote, the idea that oppressed peoples have the right to not only be recognized for their gastronomic contributions, but have the right to their inherent value to derive from them uplift and empowerment. I think that's a good note to end on. Positive.
Yeah.
Rather than all my bitching. If you do make yourself some poke, remember we were talking about poke?
Now they're afraid to make poke.
And take a picture of it. You're not selling it. You're making it to eat for yourself, because this way you're not supporting these other businesses that are appropriating. You're just making it for yourself.
Okay.
That's a good thing. Anyway, if you make yourself some, take a picture of it, tag us. You can do the same if you take a selfie giving the finger to a poke bowl chain, or to Chipotle, or Sushi Shop, or... I have issues, sorry.
He has big issues.
Or just comment us up with your hot take on cultural appropriation, culinary justice, or what kind of rice is best. As usual, we can be found at Nortion of Paris on Instagram. I'm at Tavallai, my family name.
And I'm at Hanala, my first name backward.
And if you don't hate us for our wokism, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you do want to defend French soi-disant colorblindness, please do so in the text of a 5-star review to guarantee that it will be read. It's the holidays, so tip well, spend your money at local businesses, and earn bonus points from us if they're women or minority owned. We say that because we mean it, and because we have a woman and minority owned business. And also because it'll piss off Prime Minister Gargamel.
Oh, you put that in.
Seriously, Google Castex Gargamel and let the laughs go. This podcast is a production of Paris Underground Radio. Please follow and subscribe for more fun and less angry content. The opinions expressed on this podcast belong solely to the hosts of the Transplant Kitchen and do not reflect those of Paris Underground Radio. I'm not sure why I'm saying this, because this disclaimer probably has no legal value anyway. Merci, bonne journée, and aloha!
Bye!